In episode 68, Recap Checkpoint, Domains 7 and 8 Mastery, we bring the threads of supply chain and software security operations together and tie them back to practical mastery. By now, the ideas may feel familiar in isolation, but the real value appears when supplier controls, software assurance, runtime protections, and continuity planning reinforce each other. For an exam, these domains are where contracts, pipelines, and incident playbooks converge into daily operating discipline. The aim is not to memorize every term, but to see the patterns that repeat across vendors, components, and services. When those patterns are clear, both exam questions and real-world decisions become far easier to navigate with confidence. Supplier onboarding, monitoring, and lifecycle controls proved most effective when they were treated as continuous, evidence-based activities rather than one-time questionnaires. During operations, regular checkpoints on configuration drift, findings management, and change notifications kept the picture current and trustworthy. Toward the end of relationships, explicit termination assistance, data return, and access revocation steps prevented lingering exposure. Seen as a whole, this lifecycle approach turned suppliers into managed extensions of the control environment instead of opaque external risks. Contractual guardrails served as the legal skeleton that held many of these expectations in place. Security representations and warranties gave shape to what reasonable security actually meant in terms of encryption, logging, and development practices, with a right to see evidence when needed. Incident and breach clauses defined notification timelines and cooperation obligations, which mattered greatly when regulators and customers expected fast, accurate updates. Escrow arrangements created a last resort fallback for critical software, while transition assistance clauses ensured support during migrations, not just during steady state. When these provisions were drafted with input from legal, procurement, and engineering, contracts stopped being abstract documents and started functioning as enforceable security instruments. On the software side, provenance, software bill of materials, SBOM, data, signatures, and admission policies formed a consistent chain of trust across environments. Signed commits, tags, and releases from upstream projects, combined with checksum verification, helped confirm that components were what they claimed to be. SBOM generation and ingestion made transitive dependencies visible, allowing targeted responses when new vulnerabilities surfaced. Provenance attestations and admission control rules kept unverified, unsigned, or policy-violating components from entering build and runtime environments without explicit exception review. When these practices operated across development, testing, and production, they gave the organization a coherent story about both the origin and integrity of its software. Runtime protections complemented this supply chain assurance by watching what components actually did once they were deployed. Application gateways controlled and observed traffic, enforcing policies around authentication, rate limiting, and protocol handling at service boundaries. Runtime application self-protection, RASP, and sandboxing techniques added the ability to detect and limit malicious behavior even when it slipped past static checks. Memory safety mechanisms, whether through safer language choices or hardened runtimes, reduced entire classes of exploits that had traditionally plagued complex systems. Together, these runtime layers accepted that some defects and surprises would reach production, then worked to contain their impact before they reached payment flows or cardholder data stores. Telemetry priorities, alert tuning, and evidence pipelines tied these technical controls back to assurance. The most useful metrics and logs were those that could explain who did what to which system, with what effect, and when, rather than simply counting events. Alert tuning focused attention on conditions that truly signaled elevated risk, such as repeated failed supplier connections, unexpected changes in component versions, or anomalous runtime behavior, while suppressing noise that led to fatigue. Evidence pipelines ensured that key telemetry flowed into durable repositories where it could support investigations, audits, and periodic reviews. When telemetry and evidence were designed with questions from assessors and incident handlers in mind, they became assets rather than mere byproducts of operations. Incident response rhythms, tabletop learnings, and prioritization of the improvement backlog formed the feedback loop for all these domains. Regular incident review meetings and scheduled tabletop exercises turned plans into practiced behaviors, revealing where supplier coordination or software provenance assumptions broke down under pressure. Patterns from these events flowed into a structured backlog that ranked improvements by risk reduction and effort, rather than by whoever requested the loudest change. Over time, recurring weaknesses in vendor communication, runtime observability, or deployment gating could be addressed systematically. This rhythm of simulate, observe, and refine was what turned theoretical frameworks into lived organizational habits. Patching cadences, exception governance, and measurable vulnerability reductions were another area where operational discipline showed up clearly. Teams that set explicit timeframes for addressing critical, high, and medium vulnerabilities, then measured adherence to those targets, were able to show downward trends in exposure rather than just activity levels. Exception governance mattered because there were always cases that could not be fixed immediately. Documenting these, assessing compensating controls, and setting review dates prevented them from becoming permanent blind spots. By comparing vulnerability metrics over time, including for supplier-managed components, organizations could demonstrate real progress rather than just restating intentions. This measurable improvement held weight in both internal reviews and external assessments. Business continuity and disaster recovery themes from earlier episodes resurfaced here as the "what if it still fails" safety net. Continuity objectives described how quickly services needed to return and how much data loss could be tolerated, while dependency maps showed which suppliers, components, and environments made that possible. Restore testing playbooks turned those objectives into concrete drills, proving that backups, failover sites, and manual workarounds actually functioned under realistic conditions. When supply chain and software provenance data fed into these plans, teams knew which components were truly critical to restore first and which could wait. The result was a continuity posture that accounted for both technical outages and supplier disruptions in a unified way. Service-level agreements and service-level objectives, or SLA and SLO values, came together with error budgets and escalation criteria to balance ambition and realism. Uptime, detection times, and containment times were framed as explicit targets linked to business impact and risk appetite, not just as nice-to-have goals. Error budgets acknowledged that some deviation was inevitable and reserved a portion of that allowance for security-driven maintenance such as emergency patching or architectural changes. Escalation criteria made it clear when repeated SLO breaches or serious supplier incidents needed attention from senior leadership rather than staying buried in operational queues. This alignment ensured that reliability and security outcomes were measured and discussed together, not traded off blindly. Across all of these topics, recurring pitfalls became easier to recognize. Vague contracts, onboarding without verification, unreviewed exceptions, and telemetry that recorded everything but explained nothing. The small habits that consistently prevented those pitfalls often looked simple, such as insisting on evidence during supplier intake, updating contact lists after every exercise, or reviewing a single SLO each quarter with a security lens. Teams that wrote down decisions, revisited them on a schedule, and treated exceptions as temporary rather than permanent saw fewer unpleasant surprises. Over time, these modest disciplines accumulated into a posture that looked resilient, not because nothing went wrong, but because fewer issues turned into crises. Connecting these domain concepts to real roles and daily tasks helped the material become more than exam content. Procurement staff influence risk by insisting on security clauses and escrow checks. Legal teams shape how indemnities and data rights protect the organization. Engineers and administrators embody provenance and runtime protections through their tooling choices. Risk and compliance professionals weave these threads together into narratives that executives, auditors, and regulators can understand. Even individual contributors, such as developers or analysts, play a part by following intake checklists, maintaining dashboards, and contributing findings to the improvement backlog. Seeing where each role fits makes it easier to apply these ideas in conversations, tickets, and design reviews. A brief mental mini-review can help cement the patterns. Supplier onboarding that demands real artifacts, monitoring that watches both configuration and performance, and lifecycle controls that include clean termination. Contractual guardrails, warranties, and incident clauses give legal shape to these operational expectations, while escrow and transition assistance prepare for worst-case scenarios. Provenance, SBOM data, signatures, and admission policies keep untrustworthy software from ever reaching critical environments, and runtime protections stand ready in case something still behaves unexpectedly. Telemetry, patching metrics, and continuity drills provide the evidence that these systems do more than exist on paper. With repetition, the picture shifts from a long list of separate topics to a compact set of reinforcing patterns. Supporting this kind of recap with deliberate action is what moves understanding into mastery. For someone in a security role, a practical next step is to choose 2 refresh topics from these domains, perhaps supplier lifecycle oversight and software provenance, or SLA alignment and continuity testing, and schedule focused drills or review sessions around them. Those sessions might examine one contract, one supplier, or one critical application in depth, asking how well reality matches the principles described here. Each refresh adds clarity, fills a small gap, and strengthens the habits that prevent larger problems. As those cycles accumulate, confidence grows not from memorizing terms, but from seeing them work together in the everyday fabric of secure operations. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.